Professor Stone, and I will always say Professor Stone. Stone and I go back many, many years, and he asked me to come, and I said, well, what would you like me to talk about? He says, give him a little bit about yourself. So I took a look and did a little research about the Urban League, and a lot of things humbled me. But speaking to an organization like this really humbles one, because the history goes so far back. It's basically the oldest organization in the country like this, that's actually performing this kind of task. And it grew out of several other organizations that were given the task of protecting people who at that time had absolutely no protection. So I say thank you. To start off, years ago, when Einstein was alive, after he had perfected his theory of relativity, it made him world famous. And he was in high demand, going all over the country, in fact, all over the world, different universities around the country, but he didn't drive. So he depended on his chauffeur to take him from speaking engagement to speaking engagement. And after one of his lectures, the chauffeur and he were in the car riding back, and the chauffeur, for some strange reason, bore a striking resemblance to Einstein. And as they were driving back, the chauffeur commented, says, you know, I've heard this lecture so many times, I bet you I could give it. And Einstein thought for a couple of seconds, smiled and laughed. He said, really? He said, well, we're going to Yale next week. Let's do it there. So sure enough, they arrive at Yale. The chauffeur gets up on the podium, delivers the speech perfectly. The standard speech without a flaw. And Einstein sitting in the back, his arms folded, smiling, and as happy as he could be. Well, just as the chauffeur was about to leave the podium, a particularly snotty grad student jumped up and asked a very complicated question about antimatter formation, hoping to trip the great professor up. And without missing a beat, the chauffeur replied, sir, the answer to that question is simple. So simple, in fact, I will let my chauffeur answer it. Now, there's a lesson in this. It's a big lesson. And that lesson is whenever you think or you feel that you've been backed into a corner and there's no way out, and the situation is the worst it's ever going to be, always stop and think, because there's always a chance you can find a way out. But only if you're calm. And the calmness involves a trick. And that trick is to ignore the noise in your head of panic and despair. Because it is a scientific fact that when we become upset and we panic, we are producing in our brain a chemical. And this chemical causes our brains to become a little foggy. So what we have to do is teach ourselves how to hear that faint voice of reason and logic, which will bring us through to a solution. Now, some people appear to have this naturally, others have to train themselves. And I will tell you, we can all train ourselves. And since we are faced with problems daily, whenever we're under pressure, we should stop. Some people say count to 10. Some say inhale 10 times. But whatever it is, stop, bring things to a pause, and start to practice thinking clearly. And at the end of the day, not only will you feel better, you'll help produce a better world. Now, I'm supposed to be here today to kind of talk about racial healing, reconciliation in my life. Well, I guess getting into that age where people start thinking I'm an old person. I will be 75 years old my next birthday. I was born in Greenville, Mississippi. I'm the oldest of 2 kids. My parents were married for almost 14 years before they had their first child. That's me. And I grew up on the height of the 50s and 60s when the civil rights movement was at its zenith. And for some reason, God saw fit to have me not be a Baptist, but a Catholic. And if you know anything about the South is a very religious place on its surface, but only if you believe in one religion, usually, depending on where you live. Louisiana, a couple other small places are exceptions, but usually being a Baptist. And if you are in the Mississippi Delta and you're not a Baptist, you may be walking not only on thin ice, you may be walking on no ice. And being Catholic, we would have a saying that was kind of crude. It was the equivalent of being black twice, because the price that you paid for that religion and your beliefs in a place that believes so highly was quite striking. The school I attended was a very small Catholic school. And I am out in my garage now, and Stone has been to visit me. And the church we had on the campus of this little school we had, I thought was a cathedral. As it turned out, I built a garage larger than the church. And the nuns who were there to teach us and to look after us lived in our neighborhood. And these were white women living in a black neighborhood in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was not a pleasant situation for them in the Mississippi Delta. These women, I recently found out, all but 3 or 4 of them came from Germany, and most prior to World War II. So here they are, living in a black neighborhood, looking after black kids in the Mississippi Delta. A war goes on, World War II, where Germans are hated yet again. So their lives could not have been in any way pleasant. But what they did do was they dedicated not only their lives, but their whole being to the kids that they had in their care. And I'm one of those kids. I have a teacher who is still alive, one of the nuns, the last one from Sacred Heart, and her name is Sister Carmelina. She's 94, 95 this year. I speak to her every day, twice a day on the phone still. And I'm often asked why, because those people had the opportunity and used it to make that big of an impact on the lives of so many of us. I graduated not from that Catholic school because as time moved on, it did not have enough students to sustain itself. So I graduated from the public school, Coleman High, in my hometown of Greenville, Mississippi. Growing up there was somewhat interesting. We as a town had black police officers. There was only one stipulation: they couldn't arrest white people. So if they had the misfortune of coming up on even a murder of a person not of color, the best bet for them would be to just turn and go away and not have seen anything. Because although the Supreme Court had finally ruled that we could testify in court against people, it was not necessarily the case in every Mississippi town or city. I was able to graduate, as I said. I joined the Navy in high school. The town's makeup was most interesting. Mississippi had and Arkansas and Louisiana. When freedom came, they looked about because the South was extremely poor. And we were leaving the plantations and farms and either trying to make it on our own or leaving the area totally. So they concocted various schemes for new people. Who were some of these new people? They were Italian. The farmers in Mississippi and Louisiana and what have you, they didn't have a lot of money. So every October, after the picking of the crops or harvesting, they would go to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, sit with rich bankers there, get loans for the next year's crops. So they got the idea to replace African Americans on a lot of the plantations. They were going to bring new people in. So one of the schemes was to go to Italy, and they brought Italians from Italy directly to New Orleans. These people never came through the port of New York. No Ellis Island. It was in through New Orleans and brought them up the river into the Mississippi Delta. If you would like, there is a plantation called Sunnyside Plantation that is in Arkansas, and my hometown was right on the Mississippi River. And you go across the river, you're in Arkansas, you come back across, you're back in Mississippi. These people were not considered white. They were not at the very beginning even allowed to attend school. So when you go into the Mississippi Delta, in fact, in Louisiana, you will see a large contingency of Italians. You will wonder sometimes, how did these Italians make it there? That's how. But in the Mississippi Delta, you will have people who are half African-American, half Italian, or have an Italian last name, and you're thinking, why would this person of color have an Italian name? And that is one of the reasons. Another group that was similarly situated were the Chinese. You will find people in the Mississippi Delta of color who will have Chinese last names, because it was illegal for a while for Chinese women to even come into America. When they had the Chinese Exclusion Act, the people who were here, if they could deport them, they did. And the ones who were here, often when they were in places like Mississippi, Alabama, what have you, they were not considered white. They were considered people of color and usually relegated to an African-American neighborhood. So in turn, you would have a number of people who were half Chinese and half African-American. And at my school, we had people who were partially Italian, partially Chinese, some who if they left Mississippi, and some did, they would be considered white. But the problem was they couldn't in Mississippi pass the 1/32 rule. It's often called the 1-drop rule. If you had 1 drop of black blood, you were done. So those who decided to just excommunicate themselves from their family would often leave the South and just go away and never come back. You know, and what a price to have to pay for freedom. What a price to have to pay for what you believe would be actual upward mobility in the country that you called, country of your birth that you called your home. So I had a chance to observe all of this around. My parents, when I was born, were already voting, which was a feat unto itself. In Mississippi, most of the southern states, there was a thing called the poll tax. When I came of age, in fact, the most important document I own is my mother's last poll tax receipt. Now that poll tax receipt was only $2, but that started in the 20s as $2, when you could work from can't see to can't see and still not make the $2 for that poll tax. But let's say you did by chance have the $2 and you could pay the poll tax. In Mississippi, that still did not entitle you to the right to vote. The way you got to vote in Mississippi was you had to pass an exam. And by the way, the exam was 3 pages long. And sometimes the person who was actually administering the exam to you couldn't read or couldn't pass the exam his or herself. And one of the great questions on this exam, and Professor Stone, you will love this question, read and interpret a certain part of the Mississippi State Constitution. So how many people were Constitution law scholars who were going to be able to sit, have someone point out a section of the Constitution for the state of Mississippi, write it out, and then write an interpretation and an explanation of that section? And this person was then going to make a decision if you passed or not. And I won't tell you how many people did not pass. And one of the most interesting things about my state was, at the time, there were counties in Mississippi, of the 82 counties, some had a majority, 70, 80, 90% were African-American, and nobody voted of African descent in the whole county. It's amazing, truly amazing. In 1890, Mississippi got a new constitution. And they bragged that when they put that constitution into effect, that basically no Black person would ever vote again. And unfortunately, that Constitution was copied all over the place. And to the point, the Constitution that they enacted and the rules they put in place in the 30s, in fact, Hitler sent people to Mississippi to actually study the process and rejected some of the things that were going on in Mississippi as being too terrible. And this is Hitler saying that. So it was not a wonderful place to live, but I must say it was a wonderful place to be from, not in. And I think that I was very, very fortunate in having the parents that I had and the environment I had. Because some of the most important things that I was taught by my folks is that you have to be very, very careful about understanding your surroundings and hate. My father always had one of the statements he made was, you can't move either with your foot on somebody else's neck. You are trapped too. And one of the things about healing and reconciliation, and when you made a decision to join an organization like this, like the Urban League, you've already made that leap of saying that you understand healing, you understand reconciliation, you understand love, and you are no longer trying to put your foot on anyone's neck. But there's a problem with that. There may be people trying to put their foot on yours. Because when you stand up and you take a stand today with the world in which we are in, often you, by people that you would never expect to be critical, will be. So not only are you taking a chance, you are exposing yourself to a bit of unfriendliness that you could avoid. So I'm saying thank you. Thank you, because unless we all get in this together, we're in a bind. This country right now is almost in a, those of you who into boating, or you like sculling with we need all hands rowing, all hands, not half hands, not some hands. America right now is below the birth rate that will actually keep the country floating. You need about 2.6 births. I think we're a little under it. Countries like Italy right now have been under it for a while. China abandoned its one-child policy because even though they got 1.5 billion people, they still need a certain number of people to keep the 1.5 billion going. And it was falling below that. So what we have to do is somehow, and it appears that this organization attempts to do it daily, is to get people to understand the importance of other folks. Get people to understand that everybody deserves a chance. You don't have to give a hand out, but you should be willing to give the hand up. Because if the person is trying to pull themselves up, that hand can help. And what we've been seeing in the last, 3 months, Supreme Court's been issuing some pretty tough decisions. You know, the schools in this country made us. The schools in this country put this country where it is. And I grew up at a time in Mississippi when Brown versus Board of Education came. It didn't change things in 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62. It took years after that. I graduated from high school in 1966, and the high school was still all Black. So when the desegregation came, one of the first orders of business was what? To strip what they could from the public schools. And when you start stripping from the public schools where the masses are actually educated, what do we have? We have schools that will start to fail. And we can then blame the school for the failing. But if you take the funds out of the school, how will it not fail? If you take the best out of the schools, how will it not fail? And yet, I go to my home state, they incarcerate a lot of people. They spend about 40 grand, $45,000 a year with no problem incarcerating someone, and will not give a child 10 grand for an education. So let's wind the clock back. At 5 years of age, 20 grand into each kid for 5 years. What do you think at the end of 20 years would happen to the recidivism rate or the incarceration rate of my home state of Mississippi? It would have to go down. And would go down simply because of one reason. The people at the bottom would have a better chance. We like to say in this country, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, a lot of people don't have boots. And if they do have straps, sometimes they may need some zippers. Because what we are facing is a cornucopia of problems. It is now migrating not only from race, but also to class. And as it migrates to class, it is enlarging the group that marginalized groups have been in since the founding of this country. We will not, at the end of the day, be able to sustain what we have been doing all of these years with the competitors we have on the horizon now. Competitors like China, competitors like India. They are not going to sit by and allow us to continue in the position we're in. They want to move forward as well. They've invested a lot in their people. They've invested a lot in their country. You know, when we go to a fine university, the research is being done by a lot of foreigners. They're not stealing information. And the easy way to determine that is look who's getting all the patents. You're not going to get a patent by stealing something. You're going to get a patent because you've done the work, turned in documents, been able to prove your case. So when I hear certain TV channels saying they're here stealing everything, and this is all in that little cabal of race. It's all in that little cabal of someone is getting something for free. And so long as we look at someone else or a different group with a jaundiced eye, as if they are profiting and we are not, or they're getting something that they do not deserve or does not belong to them, we're cheating ourselves. We're cheating ourselves. Because I guess, you know, Stone and I have talked about this on numerous occasions. You know, growing up in Mississippi, my father worked like a dog for years and could never make probably more than about $4,500 a year. People make that in a month. When I came to Connecticut at the end of 1968, there was a thing called the 25% rule. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the 25% rule. The 25% rule is 25% of your pay would pay your rent. So that means 1 week's paycheck paid your rent. When the last time you saw that? Florida right now is going nuts. So these people who were paying $1,500 now paying $2,500, $2,700 a month, their pay has not gone up like that. Food's gone up. So all of a sudden, a lot of people who never envision themselves as being in a position that some of the poor or disenfranchised are in are now facing that. But they're being told it is because of the immigrant, because this person who does not want to work, a person of color, that's why you are not moving ahead. So we look for low-hanging fruit, and then low-hanging fruit are those who don't have the microphone to speak loudly for themselves. In the organization, you guys, you have a Herculean task. You're out with a little microphone trying to make noise on behalf of these people. So some of those myths and lies can be pushed aside. Again, it's a Herculean task. I admire you for doing it, but I like to think of the thought I just had that the chair you're sitting in was on fire when you sat down. It is not an easy thing to do. So When I say about pressure and about being backed into a corner, please practice often a bit of meditation or whatever it takes. Because to accomplish what you are about to do or trying to do on a daily basis, it is not easy. It is not easy. You know, I'm down the road a little further because, you know, of when I grew up and where I grew up. But the things that you are facing have metamorphosized. They have not gone away. They've changed they've shape shifted a bit, but they're still there. This is the equivalent of arguing about two dead people. One shot, one stab, both still dead. The semantics of saying, you know, that guy, he shouldn't have, he was shot. Well, how do you can't fix that. But you can fix what's going on with this country. It will not be easy. It will not be pleasant. And it's not going to happen fast, but it can be fixed. You have to recruit more. You have to, this is a terrible thing to say, endure more. And you have to be patient, but it will happen. It can happen. If you don't think so, when this country ended the Civil War, there were Black congressmen, senators, sheriffs, postmasters, the works. Within 35 years, it was all gone. And within 30 years after that, no one remembered. And now people got back in, reinventing the wheel yet again. Do not let us backslide to the point where it is all taken away again, and we have to start at the beginning. And the fight that you've been putting up has been a beachhead that has basically prevented it from happening. And I am sure you have to get probably discouraged at times and frustrated simultaneously, because it's just not, it must often look as if it's not happening, but really it is. Because if it was not happening, I wouldn't have become an attorney. I would never have had that chance. If it would not have happened, I wouldn't have known Stone. So you keep and you stay in the fight. You know, my folks who had never, ever gone to a college campus would say to my sister and I from the time we were little kids, when they only had third grade educations, they would say, when you go to college, when you go to college. And when my sister and I graduated from college, we started to compare notes. We found out they were telling us about something they didn't even really truly know about. But they planted those seeds so deep in us with so much fertilizer that they couldn't help but grow. And you do the same thing daily when you are talking to people and interacting. You are planting seeds and you're fertilizing them, even though you may not know or realize it. Because what you represent is a world that we claim that we want, a world that we claim that this country is. And what you're trying to do is make us live up to, all of us, live up to the promise that's made by the documents that this country claims that it lives by. And what higher calling could anyone have? What more could anyone ask of any group of people other than to have everyone live up to its calling? So you should never allow Lloyd to come and speak, because we go on for days, whether or not we're getting money. And if you're a captive audience, you're really in trouble. But what I told Stone at the very beginning, that I wasn't going to try and keep people for a long time. I would prefer you ask me questions so we can actually have a give and take, so I can learn from you, and maybe I can say a few things that you may be able to take with you.
All right, what I'm going to do is stop recording so that we can then open the dialogue.